Okay, there we go. Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, all about supporting adolescent striving readers. We're so excited to be presenting this webinar along with Hill for Literacy, and we're really grateful that everyone is here, especially if this is your lunchtime or maybe your breakfast time if you're West Coast. Thank you for joining us. Um, to kick things off, hi, I'm Melanie McDermott. I'm the Director of Marketing here at Storyshares, and I head up our webinar series. I'm going to give you just a brief overview of what to expect from today's webinar. I was going to ask you to please use the chat, but unfortunately that's not working. So it does look like you can ask us questions in the Q&A. So if you have questions along the way, use that feature and we will be able to catch them there. Um, in terms of the outline of today's webinar, I'm going to do this quick introduction. I'm going to introduce you to the panelists, and then I'm going to give you a little bit of background and sort of set the stage for this conversation about adolescent literacy before I pass the mic off to our panelists, who are going to be talking about adolescent literacy in sort of a storytelling narrative form. So first, Sammy for Hope for Youth and Families is going to be sharing the problem of adolescent literacy and sharing her experiences as an educator of older striving readers. Then in part two, Ben and Emily from the Hill for Literacy are going to be talking about their journey to support evidence-based literacy instruction in K-12 and how they've recently started to focus on secondary literacy. And then in part three, Shira from Storyshares will talk about how our three organizations came together to find a solution to adolescent literacy. And then at the end, we'll have time for a Q&A, and then we'll do a quick closing. Oops, that's not. Oh, okay. Quick poll. Let's see if I can get this to work. Here we go. Okay. Hopefully you can see this up on your screen. What age group do you work with? We'd love to know who is out there in the audience today. It looks like, okay, a lot of mixed age group. A lot of people are working with many different ages of students, some middle, upper elementary, a little bit of high school, and then a lot of others. Great. I'm going to end this, and I think I can share the results just so everyone out there has an idea. Cool. Okay, and then I do have one more quick bonus poll. Let me pop that up. Okay. Do you watch Abbott Elementary? Let's see. Oh, seeing a lot of yeses. Not yet. Oh, it's kind of like, this is fun to watch. Not yet. Okay, great. Huge opportunity there. If you are in the education world or you've ever worked in a school, highly, highly, highly recommend Abbott Elementary. It's a TV show on ABC. Is that right, Shira?
I think so.
This is a little meme from it. It's just like hysterically funny and really gets to the heart of teaching, the experience of teaching. Um, Okay, so looks like some of you, but a lot of you not yet. Great. All right, let's kick things off. I'm going to introduce our panelists. First up, Sammy Krzyzanowski. Did I pronounce that right, Sammy?
Oh, thank you.
Is the Director of Innovative Reading at Hope for Youth and Families, which is located in Springfield, Massachusetts. Before she joined Hope for Youth and Families, she taught high school for 10 years in a variety of places. Sammy has also worked with youth and young adults at Camp Howe, also in Massachusetts, where she serves as a board member. And she's also a fellow with the Council on English Leadership through the NCTE. Welcome, Sammy.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Ben Schurz, who is the Director of Strategic Partnerships and Business Development at the Hill for Literacy. Ben is a passionate education leader who's committed to expanding access to high-quality, evidence-based instruction for students in pre-K through 12th grade. He's driven by the belief that every student deserves effective, engaging learning experiences and that partnerships rooted in trust and shared purpose are key to making that vision a reality. And I think, Ben, thank you. Just you being here as part of this webinar is evidence of that very sentiment. And then next up, we have Emily Russin, who is also a member of the Hill for Literacy. She's a lead facilitator and heads up the adolescent literacy team. Um, she has been leading educators in translating research into practice in pre-K through 12th grade throughout her whole career. When thinking about middle and high school students, Emily has worked in roles such as literacy coordinator, literacy coach, reading specialist, and classroom teacher. So, Emily, what haven't you done? Welcome. And then last but not least, we have Shira Engel from Storyshares. Shira is our Chief Academic Officer here at Storyshares, and she's also a dyslexia specialist. Shira developed her passion for adolescent literacy when she taught middle school humanities and noticed that many of her brilliant students were struggling with sounding out words and foundational reading skills. So this experience gave her a deep appreciation for the transformative and restorative power of the science of reading, structured literacy, and education advocacy. So welcome to our panelists. Thank you so much for joining us.
Really focus.
Oh, sorry. I'm going to pop back to that, but I realized.
Really focus.
Okay, just real quick. I wanted to give a little bit more context for today's conversation and webinar topic. If you don't know, Storyshares was founded by our CEO, Louise Bagelman, almost 10 years ago. Louise was a middle school teacher in Lynn, Massachusetts. And as a teacher, she realized that she didn't have books or materials for her middle school students who were still working on their foundational reading skills. So she started writing those books, and Storyshares was born. I'm going to play this quick clip from Louise's TED Talk from last fall, which will help sort of set the stage for what we're up against in this conversation about adolescent reading intervention.
And a sense of urgency around a singular goal. Grade level reading by third grade. Because we know that if you can't read by the end of third grade, your life outcomes look different. You are 4 times less likely to graduate high school and 6 times more likely to end up in prison or on welfare. In a recent episode of Sold a Story, the podcast that in many ways inspired the birth of this movement, they said this: you may be worrying about high school, but if those kids aren't reading by third grade, then you've lost them. You have to do that early part really well. And yet, 70% of 4th and 8th graders today are not reading proficiently. So we adhere to this thinking that we've lost them in third grade when they're a mere 9 years old. We will never reverse this trend. We would be giving up on the tens of millions of students who have already gotten past this point, still can't read. We will never break the cycle of illiteracy.
Okay. Powerful, powerful words to get us started. I'm going to pass the mic off to Sammy, who's going to be talking to us about her experience of being a high school teacher and having older striving readers in her classroom.
Good morning. So as Melanie shared a little bit with you earlier, I've worked in a number of schools in a variety of settings with a variety of students. And each year through my movement, I've felt like our students have been less and less engaged. So I'm sharing some pictures in the slides today from my experience. And in that first picture up at the top are 2 of my students reading Shakespeare, getting into it, getting excited, not needing a ton of guidance or engagement from me to be able to create kind of the momentum and excitement that they had to get into the movement. They created a boat out of chairs, they moved through, they asked questions. Each year after that, and that was my first year teaching, which was fantastic, I felt like I was having that issue of engaging students more and more. And I didn't understand why. And it would come down to, right, having to sit outside with them if I wanted them to even open the book, and then reading to them because they wouldn't read it themselves and they wouldn't read it out loud themselves. They would follow along, but we would have to tell them what page to be on and pieces like that. And like Louise said, right, she uses that phrase of losing students. I felt like I was losing my students, and my teachers around me agreed, but I didn't want to give up on them because that's not what we do as teachers and educators in this world. But I think, like many of us, we have that problem of we only have so much power in our classroom. And so I would go to our administration and say, I think this is something we should try. I'm seeing this issue and I don't understand. And through much of this, I'm working with 10th, 11th, and 12th graders, not understanding that the issue came down to their inability to read. Because when you're working with 10th and 11th and 12th graders, or even 7th and 8th graders at that, the first idea is, well, they don't want to be there, they don't care, they're not engaged. And that's what I kept being told was, well, if they don't want to be there, then you can't make them be there. And as I've started to do more and more of this work, I've now learned that my students needed help with their foundational skills, and they had missed pieces early on. And instead of the teams that I was working with wanting to solve that problem, they didn't even want to understand it. And so they would say, well, we'll just, it's fine. Like if they don't want to be here, we can't make them be here. And you just need to work with the students who want to be in your classroom. And so our solution has moved into this. I wanted to find a way to be able to support students in more of a solutions-based way. And that's when I found my current position, which is working at Hope for Youth and Families. And that's the next slide, if you can switch to it, Melanie. Thank you. So, as I said, right, I had my students reading books like the Super Easy Teen Cookbook, which is fantastic, and they loved it. But that's all they would read. And they could read it in a day, or they would look through it and take it home. And I was really struggling to find text. So when I came into Hope for Youth and Families, which is a nonprofit located in Springfield, Massachusetts, my boss was excited because he had read a Mass Live article on Louise in Storyshares and had learned about Hill for Literacy and had started to put together a program for reading for middle school youth in Springfield using the books that Storyshares produces. And my first week on the job, I was thrown into a classroom and said, okay, you're going to teach reading. And I was like, well, I've never taught reading. I don't know how to do this. What are we going to do? And I started going to coaching sessions with Hill and Storyshares, and I started getting lessons from them and learning how it all worked and seeing that for the first time in my career, there was a solution to help those students who were disengaged. And sometimes they wouldn't even open the cookbook because they just were, they didn't care, and they were so distraught that and struggling that they didn't have the motivation to try. I had those students now sitting next to me flying through books. And so now we're about a year and a half into this program, continuing our work with Hill for Literacy and Storyshares. And we've now worked with over 300 youth who are showing gains in their reading. And the difference really comes down to the fact that we're working with partners who care and see the problem, but also see a solution. And they also, we're looking at materials that are student-centered and research-based, but they're also materials that teachers are able to access and then flip into multiple ways of their classroom to be able to assess and work with multiple levels of students. And so through that, we've created this partnership. And Mel, if you can show the next slide, you'll see these are just some of our students who have had success in the past few years. We pair them with mentors and we work with teachers in the schools. And these are students, my two on the right are from this past summer, students who came in day one and were like, nope, I don't want to do this. I don't know why I'm here. I hate this. And by the end of the summer, they were the ones getting up and sharing their work and writing their summaries together and reading the books. And so it's been a wonderful experience to see this problem have a solution and be able to take some advocacy and be able to step in. And I know that Emily and Ben and Cher are going to share a little bit more about the details of exactly how the solution it works and how these pieces connect. And so I'm going to pass it off to Ben and Emily to share that next piece of the puzzle of this is where it came from. And there's teachers like myself, right, who see the problem. But how did we get to where we are today?
Sammy, thank you so much for sharing. I got goosebumps when you were talking about that like transformational moment with students because it's just like the most magical thing you could ever hope for. So thank you for telling us your story. And I'm going to pass it off to Ben and Emily from Hill for Literacy.
All right, thanks, Melanie, and thank you so much, Sammy, for sharing your story, all the work that you're doing. And it reminds me of my start in education, which was teaching special education in Oakland, California, and to high school students. And I just couldn't believe that I had, a 15-year-old and a 17-year-old student, and that couldn't even put two letters together, right? And I went through a similar kind of journey of exploring how do I teach kids to read? Because even after I had all my schooling and master's degree, I hadn't really gotten that detailed kind of routine to help students who are older build their confidence and be able to engage in reading. And so, thanks so much. It's fun to share that kind of experience together. And then I've kind of gone on. Now I'm here at the Hill, and I'll tell a little bit about the story of the Hill, where we started, where we're going, and how we found our way to a partnership with Storyshares. Again, my name is Ben Schurz, and at the Hill, our mission is really to create a world of readers. That's what we want to do, and we know that involves lots of different people in lots of different spaces. But essentially, I think we all want this kind of image of engaged students who are interested in what they're reading, they're smiling, they're talking together about what they're reading, able to engage in the projects, and really bring that curiosity to the lessons that anybody in schools provide for their students every day. And we know that that's the outcome that we all want. And in order to get there, we really need a whole system of support, right? Because a school is a complex system of people, of tools, of materials, of timing and schedules and buses, all kinds of things go into it. And so at the Hill, we really focus on these elements. You can see the Hill for Literacy model here. And we support schools with assessment. Which assessments do they give? When do they give them? And how are they coordinated? Do schools have too many assessments? And do they need to look at that? We support tiered instruction, right? And we do professional learning, which is primarily our way of working with schools. And we also look at community engagement. And you can see all of that wrapped up in leadership because we know that in order to get this outcome of joyful students, we need clear leadership that's well aligned and really supports the alignment of all of these complex components that go into schools being successful. And so the Hill has started out as part of the Mass General Hospital IHP program, which is a speech and language program in Boston. And when we founded or in 2001, we've been grounded in evidence-based literacy instruction since the beginning. That's always been our emphasis, knowing that it works, knowing how important it is. And when the Reading First National Initiative came along, we were chosen as the professional development provider in the state of Massachusetts. And then in 2010 became a independent nonprofit. So we're now a nonprofit. We work across the country. We're approved in many different states, Arkansas, Hawaii, Oregon, and many New England states. But in 2013, we started a project with Connecticut. On the screen, you see it says CK3LI. That's kind of a mouthful. It's the Connecticut K3 Literacy Initiative. And that was a really interesting initiative that combined legislative priorities and funding with improving reading instruction in the state of Connecticut. And it was a project that was funded through the University of Connecticut that did the research, and the Hill was one of the implementation partners. And so we worked in the state of Connecticut to support that that project, which has been a statewide project for many, many years. In 2019, we launched Hill Online, which was a way that we could provide our services live online through Zoom chats like this. We also started building some asynchronous courses that teachers can use that combine and align with our on-site support. And then 2023 was an expansion of our work in Connecticut that incorporated leadership as a particular focus, right? We know that there's a lot of work that's done in the classrooms and in schools, and Connecticut really took another step towards cultivating leadership. So leadership teams would take courses on literacy leadership at the same time teachers would take courses on the science of reading, and that would promote alignment across a district. And then last year we developed our partnership with Storyshares, and I think Sammy spoke really well about how we found each other. And Emily is going to give a little bit more detail. And now we're also partners with the Department of Elementary Secondary Education in Massachusetts for literacy launch. We're going to train 20,000 teachers over the next 5 years. So you can see partnerships is really kind of where we're able to bring things together, where we can grow. And if we're looking for impact on student outcomes, working together is really how we can achieve that because we all have so much to offer. Right. And it's a very complex problem that requires expertise in different areas. And so my last slide before Emily takes over is really to just share the idea and the outcomes that we see. We know that in order to get these engaged students, we need engaged teachers. And that when teachers are engaged, when teachers feel good about what they're doing, when they're collaborating with their peers and partners, when they're excited to come to work every day, we know we're going to see more engaged students also. So we're all in on that, right? We want to support all educators that are out there to feel comfortable and confident with the lessons they're providing and able to meet the needs of their students, right? When you're teaching 10th grade and you have a student that's coming in reading at a third grade level, that's hard, right? The variety that you might have. And so we want to be able to support that kind of knowledge that you have as a teacher, an educator, a leader, to be able to meet the needs of all your students. And part of that's clarifying any confusion, right? How many messages do we get about what we need to do, when we need to do it, with whom, and how do we parse out the different things that we do during the day? And so we work to clarify a lot of the confusion that's out there and promoting collaborations, how we do it, right? By everybody working together, sharing ideas, finding out what's best, and through that process, really enhancing teaching that's happening and the learning that's happening in schools and across the country. So that's and that of course has led and cultivated this partnership with Storyshares. We've been a K-12 provider all along. Like we've always done adolescent literacy. And we know that a lot of the emphasis, right, through Reading First and a lot of science of reading grants and legislation is focused on the K-3 space. But we know, like we saw in Louise's TED Talk there, just that brief component, it is so important to continue reaching those students in the upper grades. And so we're really excited about the partnership with Storyshares. And now Emily is going to go into a little bit more detail about what we bring to the partnership.
Sure. Thanks, Ben, for teeing that up. I'll tell you a little bit about our adolescent literacy approach and then how we moved into working with Storyshares and with Hope for Youth and families. So the work we've done in recent years with middle and high schools is framed using this model from Shanahan and Shanahan. The reality is that students in our classes represent a range of literacy levels, and those are described using this model: basic literacy, intermediate literacy, disciplinary literacy. So basic literacy represents the stage in which students are working on mastering decoding and fluency skills, although grade level standards expect that that's mastered by grade 3 for many reasons, as we've explained in the previous discussions. Some students still enter middle and high school with these needs. Intermediate fluency targets key strategies for comprehension and vocabulary, such as summarizing, questioning. At that stage, students are reading fluently, but are more independent in making sense of texts that are becoming more and more complex. Finally, disciplinary literacy represents the most sophisticated level of literacy. Middle and high school standards across content areas are written with disciplinary literacy in mind. So at that stage, students learn nuances of comprehension in different disciplines. So for example, summarizing on a lab report will be different than summarizing a primary source in history. In our Tier 1 work with students, what we do is we scaffold access to complex text so that all students are learning disciplinary literacy. Yet we know from the research that our students with basic literacy needs must have instruction that directly targets their needs to accelerate their growth. They need both this scaffolded access to disciplinary literacy and targeted instruction directed at their need. So our work at the Hill with Tier 1 was already effective, and much of our intervention work for adolescents was working with schools and district leaders to better articulate their MTSS models. So helping them identify their assessments and how their assessments could lead them to identify instructional focus areas for students. Yet what we were finding with students in our upper grades of grades 3 through 5 who were receiving explicit instruction in decoding and in fluency that was linked to controlled text was really exciting. We were seeing a lot of growth there. And when Hope for Youth and Families approached us with this problem, this request to see could we use this approach with older students, we saw no reason that these instructional routines could not be used with older students who had the same needs. The major barrier was actually the text they would use, because most of the books available were unengaging or were aimed at young elementary students, where we know motivation is key for adolescents. They would check out if they thought they were reading a book that was meant for students much younger than them. So being introduced to Storyshares was really exciting for us to find a partner with a mission aimed just at this. And we worked together to take our existing content and bridge it to make this really powerful product. So why don't we go to the next slide? So we have a self-paced asynchronous course that trains teachers working with students with basic literacy needs how to design an explicit lesson plan that targets decoding or fluency needs. And the course builds background knowledge in the science of reading and connects that research to instructional routines that are modeled through video. The course provides resources for teachers to plan their lessons specifically for their context, for their students. And each routine is modeled with a text from Storyshares and with adolescents in the videos from the schools in which we work. The next slide, I think, yes, shows what these lesson plans end up looking like. So, as I mentioned, the research on adolescent literacy recommends that students with foundational needs receive intervention from a trained specialist. This course is meeting the needs of supporting many teachers who work with students who have instructional needs of decoding and of fluency. They can keep coming back to it over and over through the year. Working with Hope for Youth and Families, we were working with some teachers who had classrooms in schools and lots of experience, as well as some teachers and tutors who had never taught before, and we were able to engage through building a course like this successfully. This course is, as intervention, we aren't suggesting that this would meet the needs of students with significant and profound learning disabilities who might need a very intensive instruction, but it does seem to be meeting the needs of a large group of students who have gaps in their learning, who are significantly behind their peers in reading fluently. So this course we highly recommend now that it be paired with Lift, which you're about to see a little bit about Lift in supporting teachers in high quality implementation. The professional development addresses the how and the why these lessons are designed the way they are. And that same template is used in Lift. And the explicit lesson plans for decoding and fluency were written and vetted by our HEAL team. So it can be used for anybody working with students in these needs that have access to controlled text, but it aligns seamlessly with the Lift product. Which why don't I pass it on to Shira to tell us more about that? Thanks.
Hey, hi everyone. It is wonderful to follow the context of Sammy and the Hill team. The work that we did for Hope for Youth and Families was extremely generative. And as Melanie mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, I started off not as an interventionist. I became an interventionist because of a need in my classroom and a principal's very strong belief in doing exactly what the Hill does, in really training up teachers to know how to support older students with foundational literacy. And this key, we had a teacher from the Innovative Reading Program, which is what the Hope for Youth and Families calls the reading program that the Hill for Literacy and Storyshares collaborated on, share that students wanted to keep reading even when the bell rang. And this motivation piece, it's huge for all students of all ages. It can be, when the motivation is not there, it can be a profound barrier for older students who are working on their foundational literacy skills. So we were really thrilled with this feedback, and we also wanted to create a program that supported students with becoming deeply engaged with reading. And that's really the goal of Lift, Literacy Intervention for Teens, which I am going to speak to. But first, if Melanie, if you can go to the next slide. There, when there has often been there's been a lot of research, as was mentioned, on K3 literacy. And when we talk about the difference between learning to read and reading to learn, there's a lot of research on adolescent literacy on reading to learn. And the research is still really being developed, and we're seeing a big push in that direction now, which is phenomenal, on learning to read. For those older students who are still working on those foundational skills, why and how does this look different for them? And there is a really phenomenal resource that we will put in the chat that came from the Institute for Education Sciences and the What Works Clearinghouse on recommendations for reading intervention for grades 4 through 9. So really looking at how is this different than it is for grades K to 3. And Storyshares began before Lift, before this partnership with Hill, before the partnership with Hope for Youth and Families, with looking at this library of books that we had that were designed to engage older students working on their foundational literacy skills. And we wanted to think through, how do we also support their teachers so that they know what to do with the books? It's like, I'm sure so many teachers out there have had the experience. I had this experience of walking into my classroom. There was a box of books on a table. I was very grateful for them, had no idea how they got there. And then I was like, what do I do with them? And so we really wanted to address that for educators who were working with Storyshares decodable and high-low books. And we use this practice guide as our way of aligning the evidence and the research with the resources that we had in order to create implementation support in a relatively informal way for the teachers who were using them. And so this first recommendation is on building students' decoding skills so that they can read complex multisyllabic words. Emily mentioned this, but for students who need support with those very initial consonant, vowel, consonant words, we really want to support them in often in a tier 3 setting, where they are getting support also with phonemic awareness where they're working on those very foundational skills. What we are doing with Lift is we are introducing multisyllabic words sooner than they might be introduced in another program, particularly in a program for K to 3. But we're not just introducing them and saying, okay, now you're expected to read them. There are instructional routines that are embedded that support students and provide the scaffolds that they need so that they are able to build those decoding skills in a way that gives them access to more text faster. And then Melanie, if you go to the second one. Thank you. The second recommendation is to provide purposeful fluency building activities to help students read effortlessly. And when we look at fluency, and this is something that is, and we'll talk about how this works in the LIFT program, fluency is that focus on reading rate, accuracy, prosody, and reading with expression. And often older students, and this is one of the reasons why I love this recommendation, older students are very good at isolating one of those things, or maybe using one or two of those to overcompensate for some gaps in the third. And fluency is all three of those truly working in tandem. So where they are not just reading at a speed, I've had a lot of students who would love to show how quickly they could read, and accuracy was sacrificed as a result of that. And that's not fluent reading. And so when we differentiate for older students, and this was something that came about with the partnership that we had with these two organizations, is really looking at what does it mean to set a responsive purpose for reading. So that when we tell students, okay, it's time to practice fluency, we are actually teaching them what that means. We're giving them the language of accuracy, rate, and expression. We're supporting them with taking control of their own intervention and understanding what those terms mean and learning how they can track their progress. It's not just an interventionist tracking their progress, but it's also students doing that metacognition of okay, I think I'm pretty good with, I can read with expression. I feel confident with that. So today I'm going to focus on accuracy. Or I am really accurate. I have worked so hard in my decoding lessons and in the decoding portion of my lessons that I feel really strong with the accuracy piece. Today I'm going to really focus on rate. And that flexibility is really built into the model that we've created together. And then we also want to support students in reading to learn as they are learning to read. And that is where those comprehension building practices come in. So that students are making sense of the text, they're building their knowledge base as well, they're learning new vocabulary, and they have a set of comprehension building practices. They have queries that they're responding to as they read. We're giving teachers really rich questions that they can ask students so that students can have equally rich responses. And then the last one is that we really want to provide students with opportunities to practice making sense of a stretch of text that will expose them to complex ideas and information. So students are building their reading stamina, and they are using the more foundational skill practice with decodable and high interest lower level texts, which we'll talk about in a moment, to make sense of complex ideas and information and build background as well. So we created Lift, and I should just kind of back up and say that I was nervous about creating a literacy intervention program because there are so many out there, and there are so many really, really phenomenal programs that are out there that support students with decoding and fluency skills. I know that from my own practice, and we see this a lot with Storyshares, and I would love to know if the folks attending this webinar, whether it's live or asynchronously, have had a similar experience, because we do engage in this conversation a lot, where I was doing a lot of piecemealing of programs. And actually, this came about through a bit of a piecemeal of programs, but I have had really phenomenal routines for direct instruction in foundational skills that were initially, when I received them as a teacher and as an interventionist, they were paired with texts that did not engage my students. And so when it came time for connected text practice, for reading a decodable text or reading a fluency passage, um, I would lose my students. And during the part of the lesson where I needed them to hold on the most, because it was the time where they were actually applying those skills that they were learning. And so I really heard this when Sammy shared about her experience as well in the classroom. Like, what does it mean to hold on to our students and to get them so engaged that they are trying to grasp the material themselves? And so, what we decided to do as part of the work for Hope for Youth and Families was pair those, and you saw an example of that Emily shared, pair those Hill routines, those evidence-based routines for teaching foundational skills like decoding and fluency with a lot of comprehension and vocabulary work embedded in that. And to pair those with Storyshares texts that were designed with older students in mind, that were truly designed with teenagers in mind. And I have had the experience of I have pretty much only taught middle and high school students my whole career, and I feel very confident in saying that teenagers are really comfortable claiming and when they know when something was not made with them in mind. They are hyper aware when something was not made with them in mind. So through the work that we did for the Hope for Youth and Families, we really thought through what would it look like to create something that completely and totally centers the experiences of adolescent and older striving readers so that they can get these materials and know this was made with me in mind. And they can have that experience of feeling represented, not only in the books that they are reading, but also in the routines, in the way that we're talking to them about their own intervention. And there is a lot of research that's coming out right now about giving older students the ability to take control and ownership of their own intervention process, so that they can track their own progress as well, and so that they are able to really understand what literacy means for them and how it will function in their life and in their lives. And if you can move on to the second one. So we piloted this with the Hope for Youth and Families in a school year program. So we first started off as a summer program where we had the Storyshares books and we had the Hill routines. And we saw that that really worked in that summer program, and we extended it and expanded it to the school year. And during that extension and in that expansion, we worked on very intentionally marrying those routines in those lesson plans that Emily shared with the Storyshares texts, and providing professional learning that made that combination really seamless for the educators using it. Ben shared this a bit in his piece, but there is, for teachers of older striving readers, often their background is in teaching students how to read, in teaching students how to read to learn, who are already accessing text on grade level. And that is often not the reality for those teachers. And for me as a teacher, that is why I was like wildly unprepared for students that I had in my classroom who were working on sounding out single syllable words. And so the professional learning piece and really showing teachers how the pairing of the routines and the text is seamless is so crucial, because we are supporting those teachers in also addressing in addressing a problem and a challenge that a lot of teacher education programs are starting to realize is a challenge and a mismatch, which is the gap between foundational skill instruction and teachers who are taught specifically to teach students who are already reading on grade level. And so we received some efficacy study results from a study that we did with Johns Hopkins once we really did pilot this during the school year program with with these instructional routines in ways that were really supportive of the texts and vice versa. And the result is Lyft, which came about partially accidentally. Like it came about through doing this specifically for one program. And then at the end of the year, we realized that we had an intervention that worked for older striving readers. And so this is, I'll show you just on camera as well. What you are seeing is a snapshot of what comes from a fairly comprehensive educator manual that pairs with the Hill asynchronous course. And this, we are using the Hill routines in tandem with materials that were really designed for older striving readers in mind. So we have decodable texts that are written at that intersection of interest level for middle and high school students and skill level. So for students who are working on those phonics skills, we have student workbooks that look like they're workbooks that a middle schooler would use, that a middle or high schooler would use. And these workbooks allow students to take ownership and control of their own intervention. We have, and this is one of the things that I am most excited about, multisensory reading instruction and giving students materials that they can grapple with and grasp and use to support them in understanding those letter sounds is a huge piece of this puzzle. And we created letter sound cards that have photographs, that have keywords that are engaging for teenagers and multilingual learners, so that we're really centering those experiences in even the most nitty-gritty of the materials. And then same with the vocabulary cards as well. And so we have a decoding pathway that really supports students with that first piece of that IES framework of doing that multisyllabic decoding work. And then we have fluency lessons as well. And the fluency lessons, just like the decoding lessons, they pair a foundational skills objective. So students are really doing the work of focusing on rate, accuracy, expression. They're able to check their own progress with a fluent reading checklist. They have a workbook as well that supports them in organizing their thinking. They are also working on comprehension with really rich queries that align to grade level standards. And so students are getting another at bat with the core curriculum, even as they are working on more foundational fluency skills. And so we just wanted to show you, and Melanie put some links in the chat. We really wanted to show you what this looks like, because I think so often when it comes to adolescent literacy, the problem and the challenges are clear and abundant. And sometimes the solution, especially for folks who are in it on a day-to-day basis, can feel out of reach. And what we came to is a way of really marrying engagement with the research and with the evidence to support those older striving readers in accessing foundational literacy skills in ways that work and in ways that also support their developing understanding of what they're learning at grade level as well. And so I want to leave it open for some Q&A, because I think that this came about because we were trying to be really responsive. And so that is, I know, something that all three of our organizations have in common, is this commitment to being responsive. So it is my hope, and if you have questions and you're attending asynchronously, please send us an email so that we can respond. But it is my hope that we can also be responsive in our last 10 minutes of this webinar for folks to share questions, and we can answer back in the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Shira. I just want to say thank you to the panelists. You have been amazing, and it's so compelling to hear how all of these stories are connected. Ben said something, I think I wrote it down correctly. He said, this is a complex problem that requires an expert solution. And right now, you have a panel of experts in front of you. I'm speaking to the attendees here. And so if you have any any questions about the programs we've been talking about or about adolescent literacy and reading intervention in general, please put them in the Q&A, or I did get the chat working. Go me. So you can also use the chat. I am seeing a couple of questions. It sounds like Ben answered the one about the asynchronous course. Can everybody see? I think everyone can see the answer to the questions. Um, but just in case, there was a question about for the asynchronous course from Hill, are individuals who are not affiliated with the school and district able to take the course, and is there a fee associated? Ben, do you just want to briefly answer that for?
Yeah, I can share. So the asynchronous course, so I just want to be clear, Lyft is a combination of our products, services, and support. And we also each have our own individual product, services, and support. So our course, the asynchronous course for adolescent literacy, it is something that you can get on your own. You can just contact Hill for Literacy. You'll see our email later, info@Hill for Literacy or Ben@Hill for Literacy. And we offer that to all educators. So you can get that. You don't have to get the Storyshares. And for all educators who are working with students, we really recommend it. It's a great combination.
Thanks, Ben. There's another question from Leslie. Leslie's asking if we've heard about the behavioral gains as students are given the tools to re-engage in their education. That's such a good and important question.
Do you mind if I I can share a little bit of my experience with that, Leslie? And I think Sharon and Emily have heard my stories. Um, as our students, many of our students who work in our summer program, but also our after school program, are students who are already behind in middle school and are already fighting day to day to say, I don't want to be here. They've been told they can't do it by someone in their life. And then their grades tell them they can't do it. And just like you're saying, right, in your message about SEL being so key, that is one of the things that we focused on because we know that our students are already down and we want to help them get that confidence and that skill, but also just the confidence in being able to show up to school the next day. And so attendance is a huge issue, I think, everywhere. In Springfield, it is a big issue to a very large degree, and we're working in a community that sounds very similar to what you're focusing on in Detroit with your students. And what I've seen is that our behaviors, and the longer they're in the program, the more that those behaviors are decreasing. I've had students who have taken actions where they're suspended from programming because they made a negative choice, but have come back to us and said, well, can I at least get my workbook or can I at least get some books so that I can work on this at home until I get back into the program? And that engagement and that motivation that Shira was talking about is there because those students are seeing that they can do this and that they are able to improve and gain the skills, and therefore, right, those behaviors are getting stronger. They're also seeing the consequence that by acting out, they're going to lose something, but they're seeing something they're losing that they want back, and so that is helping. But we're also seeing that right in that mentorship. So one of our big pieces is making sure that we have peer-to-peer mentors with our students, and that also helps with that engagement in students. And all of our mentors are trained with the programs from Hill and Storyshares through a variety of professional developments that we offer. And so by making sure that we have people in the classroom who are trained and know what's going on, that's also helping those students find connections and confidence. And so Ben was talking a little bit about the adolescent literacy course through Hill, and I took it myself. I'm not associated directly with the school, and then our whole AmeriCorps team took it, and then eventually all of our teachers who are associated with us, but not directly with schools in that context. And so all of these materials help with all of these pieces.
And I just want to piggyback on that very quickly to share that something that made this program unique, but also I think very effective, is that the term educator is defined fairly broadly, so that it is and someone who is educating a student. So this might mean a classroom teacher, but it could mean an AmeriCorps member. And what that allows a lot of schools to do is to really make sure that the groups are small as well. so that small group instruction is prioritized. And then it also allows for there to be a lot of training for folks who might go on to be classroom teachers and maybe not get this in their graduate program, but they're at least coming in with that foundational literacy knowledge as well. So that's something that I would also just really suggest, especially if there's the possibility for any kind of peer or closer in age mentorship, that this training does, and we've seen it work really well for that as well.
Thank you both. I hate to stop the conversation here because there's so much we could keep going. There's so much, an hour is not enough. Shira, I'm wondering if you can answer this one question about can Lyft be used in upper elementary? Can you answer that pretty quickly?
Yes. So the instructional routines from the Hill for Literacy are the ones that are also used for elementary. There is nothing in the books that would not be appropriate. And what we have found at Storyshares is that it is so much easier to get a fourth grader to read something written for an eighth grader than it is to get an eighth grader to read something written for a fourth grader. So in that regard, like that does work. And the research that we shared at the beginning, or that I shared at the beginning of my piece, on that IES framework, for literacy interventions, the research there begins at grade 4. So yes, and Hill team, if I don't know if you have anything to
Yeah,
add.
just that we have our training, we have specific for different age groups, and it absolutely aligns. So we have training for intermediate grades that's asynchronous, and the lesson plan still aligns with Lyft.
Awesome. I see there's a couple more questions coming in, but unfortunately we have to stop. But I will leave you with our contact info. So here is some information from the Hill for Literacy. You can reach out to them at info@hillforliteracy.org. Ben, is there anything you wanted to say about this slide?
Sure. Just to back up what Emily was saying, that we have programs for all grade spans, right? We have pre-K, we have primary, which is K2, intermediate 3-5, adolescent 6-12. And again, we offer support on all of these elements that go into successful instruction in schools. And we support live online webinars and professional development trainings. We do asynchronous support with our courses. And we also come on site and support schools on site. There was somebody who put a question in about university programs. We do have alignment with some universities. We give credit for our courses. I'm also in conversation with some other universities about how they can use our course in their education. So depending on what your question is about, Jennifer, we do have partnerships with universities.
Awesome. Thank you.
And you can reach me. Sorry, my contact info is there. Info at Hill for Literacy will come straight to me.
Perfect. Thank you, Ben. All right, one last quick plug before we say goodbye. We have another webinar coming up next Thursday, which is all about challenges and solutions of literacy assessments for older students in particular. I know this is something that many educators are always asking us about, like what assessments should I use? How should I use them? There's a lot there. So you can scan this QR code or go to storyshares.org/webinars, and there's a link to register there. We would love to see you there. Okay. That is that. I had to throw in another Abbott Elementary thing. You learned one thing from this webinar, it's that you should watch a TV show. No, I'm just kidding. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much to our panelists. It was so wonderful to have you. We are so grateful that you joined us. And if anyone has any more questions you didn't get a chance to ask or you're wondering about, you can reach out to us at info@storyshares.org. Thank you so much.